Hey again, everybody. This is Justin, the INFJ. This one's another one of these scientific method videos. Again, I hope the last one was good. Hope it wasn't too long, and we'll see how long this one is. Hopefully you'll like the content, so it doesn't matter if it's long. Anyways, this time we're having story time for a video. I notice I look off in one of these two directions and I talk a lot. It's not because there's anything written there. There's just a wall there. It's just because I'm thinking. But anyways, this time I'm going to be reading, actually just reading some quotes from a book that I hope will be engaging anyway, that illustrates some really cool stuff of the scientific method. It's a book by Isaac Asimov. See it there? There we go. Foundation. This is one of Asimov's main classic books. Isaac Asimov is a great old scientist slash one of the great granddaddies of sci-fi. He wrote or edited over 500 books. A big pioneer in the hard science fiction genre. Anyway, this book, Foundation, like I said, is one of his main works from one of his main series. And toward the beginning, you can tell that Asimov was a little irritated by some of the attitudes he saw in the scientific community that went flatly against scientific method. Attitudes that are very prevalent today, not just in the scientific community, but among all of us so often, that are very dangerous, hurtful attitudes that get in the way of our lives. I sit here watching political arguments, whether on the news or in person, and be like, scientific method will resolve this right away. I don't mean to say who was right and who was wrong. I'm saying both sides are being wildly unscientific, and it might not make any sense right now what I mean by that, but I'm going to read some cool quotes here that they just nail it. So some great ways of explaining ways not to do the scientific method. Okay, so the premise of Foundation, this is sci-fi, it takes place 12,000 years in the future, something like that, but being old school sci-fi, it's hilarious. It's very cute sometimes how in sci-fi they'll have some things be so advanced and so different, and other things are exactly the same. For instance, in this, in Foundation, it's like I said, it's like 12,000 years in the future. The whole galaxy is ruled by this benevolent galactic empire, a good empire, not an evil empire, that is falling apart at the seams. It's fracturing. It's gotten too old and stagnant. But even though everything is so advanced, there's all this transgalactic travel, they still use nuclear power as like the best kind of power. Written in the 50s or 60s, I think that this was. It's very funny that, nuclear power was such a big thing back then. So of course, 12,000 years in the future, nuclear power would still be the big thing. It's very cute that way. Sci-fi does that kind of thing all the time. Anyways, so the basic premise here is the Foundation is a group of scientists organized by this guy, this old Bruce Wayne looking guy. Don't need to know much about him. The point is, he sees that the galaxy is falling apart at the seams, so he makes this foundation of scientists to try to save it from its fate, to try to save it from going into an incredibly long dark age, and try to gather knowledge so that it won't be lost. There's a quick and short version of it. Anyway, so in this foundation, this planet where they have this foundation going on, there's this guy named Salvor Hardin. Salvor Hardin's a very funny NTP. He's an ENTP among all these hard scientists. And he wanted to get into psychology, but couldn't find anyone to train him, so instead he became what he said was the next best thing, a politician. And so this politician who's just losing his mind, a good politician, but still a kind of a goofy politician, who's losing his mind about how unscientific some of the scientists in the book are being. So I'm gonna read a few quotes from him where he's ranting about some stuff that really applies. Okay, so that was some good lead-in. So where I'm reading right now, he's talking to the leader of these scientists, and they're really butting heads. This will all apply. This should be fun, I hope. So the leader of these scientists, a man named Paren, I don't know if you need to know that or not, is finishing up arguing with Salvor Hardin, the politician, says, "We are scientists." And Hardin leaped through the opening. "Are you, though? That's a nice hallucination, isn't it? Your bunch here is a perfect example of what's been wrong with the entire galaxy for thousands of years." Or Asimov could say, or we could say now, it's wrong with a lot of the world for a long time. "Your bunch here is a perfect example of what's been wrong with the entire galaxy for thousands of years. What kind of science is it to be stuck out here for centuries classifying the work of scientists of the last millennium?" Now that is a tendency to get so stuck on classifying the discoveries of the past, which are important discoveries, we can't go forward without them, but get so stuck on worshiping the past that we don't question it, don't improve upon it, and not only don't go forward, but start slowly stagnating backward. Okay, Have you ever thought of working onward, extending your knowledge and improving upon it? No, you're quite happy to stagnate. The whole galaxy is, and it has been for space knows how long. And he talks about that's why petty wars are becoming eternal. That's why whole systems are losing nuclear power. Ooh, nuclear power. That's why whole systems are losing nuclear power and going back to barbarous techniques of chemical power. If you ask me, he cried, the Galactic Empire is dying. Okay, this argument goes on. But that sets the scene about how this attitude of, under the guise of science, worshipping the past instead of proceeding on with more questions and hypotheses and experiments is becoming a problem in the Foundation, in the galaxy of Salvador Hardin's world. Okay, skipping ahead to a few pages farther. All right, now, in this one, an emissary from the Empire named Lord Darwin. Now, if you've seen Princess Bride, the Mowage part, where the guy doesn't pronounce his R's, this was written before Princess Bride, and Lord Darwin, this emissary from the Empire, talks that way. It's written that way. It's very funny. Marvelous, truly marvelous. Anyways, so this emissary from the Empire is anyway. All you need to know is that he's there and they're talking to him. That's all you need to know right now. So this emissary from the Empire, Lord Darwin. All right, and they were just showing him some stuff, some scientific stuff. Okay. The lights went on again. Lord Darwin said, "Marvelous, truly marvelous. You are not by chance interested in archaeology, are you, Hardin?" Remember Salvador Hardin, the politician who was freaking out about these scientists being unscientific. So Lord Darwin, the Chancellor, is asking him, you are not by chance interested in archaeology, are you, Hardin? Eh? Hardin shook himself out of an abstracted reverie. No, my lord, can't say I am. I'm a psychologist by original intention and a politician by final decision. Ah, no doubt interesting studies. I myself, you know, he helped himself to a giant pinch of snuff, dabble in archaeology. Indeed. His lordship, interrupted Paren. Remember Paren, the leader of the rather arrogant, unscientific scientists in here. His lordship, interrupted Paren, is most thoroughly acquainted with the field. Well, perhaps I am, said his lordship complacently. I have done an awful amount of work in the science. Extremely well read, in fact. I've gone through all of Jowden. These are, you're not supposed to understand these words. These are fictional sci-fi authors. I've gone through all of Jowden, Obijasi, Cromwell. Oh, all of them, you know. I've heard of them, of course, said Hardin, but I've never read them. You should someday, my dear fellow. It would amply repay you. Why, I certainly consider it well worth the trip here to the periphery. It's the place where they're at. Well worth the trip here to the periphery to see this copy of Lameth. And Lameth is the book they were looking at. By the way, would you believe it? My library totally lacks a copy. By the way, Dr. Paren, you have not forgotten your promise to trans-develop a copy for me before I leave. Only too pleased. Lameth, you must know, continued the Chancellor pontifically, presents a new and most interesting addition to my previous knowledge of the origin question, and this is why we're reading this section. Lameth presents a new and most interesting addition to my previous knowledge of the origin question. Which question? Asked Hardin. The origin question. The place of the origin of the human species, you know. Surely you must know that it is thought that originally the human race occupied only one planetary system. Well, yes, I know that. Of course, no one knows exactly which system it is, lost in the mists of antiquity. There are theories, however. Sirius, some say. Others insist on Alpha Centauri, or on Sol, or on 61 Cygni, all in the Sirius sector, you see. And what does Lameth say? Well, he goes off along a new trail completely. He tries to show that archaeological remains on the third planet of the Arcturian system show that humanity existed there before there was any indication of space travel. And that means it was humanity's birth planet, which is ironic for us because here we are knowing that it was really Sol, but he's saying, oh no, the evidence says it's this other place. Anyway. And that means it was humanity's birth planet? Perhaps. I must read it closely and weigh the evidence before I can say for certain. One must see just how reliable his observations are. Hardin remained silent for a short while. Then he said, when did Lameth write his book? Oh, I should say about 800 years ago. Of course, he has based it largely on the previous work of Glean. Then why rely on him? Why not go to Arcturus and study the remains for yourself? Why not study it yourself? Why rely on what the people from 800 years ago in this case? It's an old empire, 12,000 years old. But why rely on the work of people from 800 years ago instead of going and studying it yourself? Yes, learn from the things people said 800 years ago. Learn from what Lameth and Glean and these other fictional authors said, but go and study it yourself. Why not go to Arcturus and study the remains for yourself? Lord Darwin raised his eyebrows and took a pinch of snuff hurriedly. Why, whatever for, my dear fellow? To get the information firsthand, of course. But where's the necessity? It seems an uncommonly roundabout and hopelessly rigmaroleish method of getting anywheres. Look here now, I've got the works of all the old masters. Oh, I've got the writings of all the old masters. I've got the works of all the old masters, the great archaeologists of the past. I weigh them against each other, balance the disagreements. Okay, let me read this part again. I weigh them against each other, balance the disagreements, analyze the conflicting statements, decide which is probably correct in his subjective opinion. There's no experimentation going on here. Decide which is I weigh them against each other, balance the disagreements, analyze the conflicting statements, decide which is probably correct, and come to a conclusion. That is a scientific method. At least, patronizingly, as I see it. You can imagine Asimov having a lot of fun writing this. How insufferably crude it would be to go to Arcturus or to Sol, for instance, and blunder about when the old masters have covered the ground so much more effectively than we could possibly hope to do. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that attitude. Well, these people were great masters, so we could never hope to match up to them. So it would just be a waste of energy to try to go get first-hand study or information or whatever. We should just read what they have and compare it and cross-reference it and draw conclusions from that. That's all a formation of hypotheses. That's all that ever is. There's no experimentation going on here. You need to go do first-hand experiment, or else it's not science yet. It's just hypotheses. Sorry. Hardin murmured politely, I see. Well, how far are we reading here? All right, we're reading a little farther. Come, my lord, said Paren, the leader of the unscientific scientists here, who has no problem with these statements. Come, my lord, said Paren, I think we better be returning. Ah, yes, perhaps we had. As they left the room, Hardin said suddenly, My lord, may I ask a question? Lord Darwin smiled blandly and emphasized his answer with a gracious flutter of the hand. Certainly, my dear fellow, only too happy to be of service, if I can help you in any way from my poor store of knowledge. It isn't exactly about archaeology, my lord. No? No, it's this. Last year we received news here in Terminus about the meltdown of a power plant on the planet 5 of Gamma Andromeda, nuclear power. Last year we received news here in Terminus about the meltdown of a power plant on planet 5 of Gamma Andromeda. We got the barest outline of an accident. No details at all. I wonder if you could tell me exactly what happened. Paren's mouth twisted. I wonder you annoy his lordship with questions on totally irrelevant subjects. Not at all, Dr. Paren, interceded the Chancellor. It's quite all right. There isn't much to say concerning it in any case. The power plant did undergo meltdown, and it was quite a catastrophe, you know. I believe radiation damage. Really, the government is seriously considering placing severe restrictions upon the indiscriminate use of nuclear power, though that is not a thing for general publication, you know. I understand, said Hardin, but what was wrong with the plant? Well, really, replied Lord Darwin indifferently, who knows? It had broken down some years previously, and it is thought that the replacements and repair work were most inferior. It is so difficult these days to find men who really understand the more technical details of our power systems. And he took a sorrowful pinch of snuff. All right, that's that section, long section, but it's going to be important. Now we're going 10 pages farther. This is now Hardin, Salvador Hardin, our politician guy, losing it, exploding at the group of scientists. They're under threat of invasion, and the scientists aren't willing to. Anyway, point is, things are bad, and Salvador Hardin is finally losing it and going off, shouting at these scientists, saying, you know, why won't you try to find the solution to this problem instead of just sticking your heads in the sand? Why don't you try to find the solution? And then that's where we jump in. One of these scientists, Farah, but Hardin reminded Farah, we can't find the solution. But you haven't tried. You haven't tried once. First, you refused to admit that there was a menace at all. Then you reposed an absolutely blind faith in the Emperor. Now you shifted to Harry Seldon. Doesn't matter who that is. Throughout, you've invariably relied on authority or on the past, never on yourselves. And there it is. Throughout, you invariably relied on authority or on the past, never on yourselves. His fist balled spasmodically. This is an important topic. I'll explain how it all applies to him. His fist balled spasmodically. It amounts to a diseased attitude, a conditioned reflex that shunts aside the independence of your minds. Okay, I'm going to hit this hard later. A conditioned reflex that shunts aside the independence of your minds whenever it is a question of opposing authority. And authority in this case can mean the great writings of the past. In this case, it often does mean that. The great writings of the past. The conditioned reflex that shunts aside the independence of your minds whenever it is a question of opposing authority. There seems no doubt ever in your minds that the Emperor is more powerful than you are, or Harry Seldon wiser. And that's wrong, don't you see? For some reason, no one cared to answer him. Hardin continued, "It isn't just you, it's the whole galaxy. Paren heard Lord Darwin's idea of scientific research. Lord Darwin thought the way to be a good archaeologist was to read all the books on the subject, written by men who were dead for centuries, or decades in our case and in real life. He thought that the way to solve archaeological puzzles was to weigh the opposing authorities, and Paren listened and made no objections. Don't you see there's something wrong with that?" Now that, I interrupt here, that is something we see all the time. Thought the way to solve scientific puzzles is to weigh the opposing authorities, never going forward with first-hand testing and research oneself. Because, oh, well, we can never be as great as them. Let's just read what they have and compare. Again, the note of near pleading in his voice. Again, no answer. How far are we going here? All right, again, no answer. He went on, "And you men in half of Terminus," this is the planet they're on, "and you men in half of Terminus as well are just as bad. We sit here, considering the encyclopedia, their compiling of all ancient scientific knowledge. We sit here, considering the encyclopedia the all-in-all. We consider the greatest end of science the classification of past data. It is important," he acknowledges, "it is important, but is there no further work to be done? We're receding and forgetting, don't you see? Here in the periphery, they've lost nuclear power. In Gamma Andromeda, a power plant has undergone meltdown because of poor repairs. And the Chancellor of the Empire, Lord Darwin, and the Chancellor of the Empire complains that nuclear technicians are scarce. And the solution? To train new ones? Never! Instead, they're to restrict nuclear power. Instead of training people to handle things better, they just impose more restrictions on it. Constantly getting stagnating, getting less and less. And for the third time, don't you see? It's galaxy-wide. It's worship of the past. It's a deterioration, a stagnation. And that's good for now." That is Salvador Hardin ranting in Foundation. And I just thought those were so perfectly done. And I thought it was hilarious that Isaac Asimov, who's so well known as being this granddaddy of hard sci-fi, would put such heavy-handed things in his first real big book about scientists being unscientific. And it's the bloody politician who has the right idea of things. And who ends up being kind of the hero of that part of the story, saves the day. Anyway, I love how when Salvador Hardin says it's a conditioned attitude, a disease reflex. And I just closed the book, but I want to find that place again. Where he talks about that shunts aside the independence of our own minds. Now, here's where it applies. In many ways, the entire purpose of Albop is to get rid of that conditioned reflex. A year ago, when Cleese was just getting started on Albop, she was messing around. She wanted to do some things about personality typing Hercules and Megara and Hades and stuff. But when we first decided to really have it be a thing we were really going to do, Albop was really just a means to an end. Personality typing itself is a means to an end. And that end is deconditioning all of us from this attitude that our culture, our culture is kind of, we're raised with it without realizing it. From so many sources, from all around. This attitude that says, there are 7 billion people in the world, you're just one, you can never possibly be more than a drop in the bucket. That's not how humans function. That's how inanimate objects or less sapient creatures function. But humanity is all about taking the resources you have and making more. So that you don't just start with what you have, you make more from it. And I could apply that to so many different things. My point being, this attitude we get from the culture, this conditioned attitude that shunts aside the independence of our minds whenever it becomes a question of questioning that which is established. Now, you can kind of see why this would be important in psychology. You don't have to have a lab coat or a particle accelerator to test things as well as you can in your own life, in your own ways, for the stuff that applies to you. So, if things that we say on Albop, don't take our word for it. Don't take anyone's word for anything. If stuff you say on Albop doesn't seem right to you, then test it. Now, if it doesn't seem right to you because you don't like it, and it makes you uncomfortable, it makes you feel, and you like these other philosophies better, these other philosophies or versions of psychology better because they make you feel more valid about yourself, well, that's not experimentation. That's just, well, I emotionally like this hypothesis better. No, but test things out on your own. We mentioned facial typing some, and the reason why we're waiting so long to unveil that is going to be so useful and cool to all of you. I'm not kidding. You can walk into someone for the first time, look at their face, say, that's your type. Without fail, repeatedly, reliably, and then testing it, that does end up being their type. They do end up behaving exactly that way. It's hilarious, and it's fun, and it's so powerful. But the reason we haven't released that yet, and there have been various approximations of facial typing, people with big noses, big noses are more sexually inclined. Wow. that's vague and creepy and probably not accurate. And how would you really, and I don't know how you test that. Anyway, maybe you can figure out a way, but it'd probably end up testing not to be reliably, repeatably reliable. Anyways, the reason we haven't released it yet is because we want to show it as, we want to make it repeatable for you. We want to put it forward in such a coherent way that you can test it for yourself. You can use it for yourself, and you can see, does it work? And not just with Albop, with anything. If something doesn't make sense to you, put it on a back burner. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, when I was younger, like in high school, or middle school, there are certain things about relativity, particularly general relativity, that rubbed me wrong. Couldn't put my finger on it, but something just seemed not right. Now, the immature attitude, which I did a little bit back then, is to say, oh, that's wrong, there's something wrong with it, it's wrong. No. Put it on the back burner, wait and see. Now, for what it's worth, I did find some very interesting things later in general relativity, but that's not the point here. The point here is that if something doesn't seem right to you, put it on the back burner, wait and see. Let reality speak for itself. But do not, these two bad extremes. The one extreme is the attitude of not questioning what the people in lab coats, quote unquote, have said. And the other extreme is saying, well, it doesn't make sense to me, therefore I'm not going to believe it. No. Learn to say, I don't know. Keep it on the back burner and wait to see what reality says. So often, Khalees has had to deal with things in her Who the Crap Are You post, deal with this attitude of how dare you question the science. And what's ironic is that Khalees' own findings match up very well with Carl Jung and Myers and Briggs Myers. And a lot of the more popular, dangerous, insulting versions of internet science today, magazine science today about personality typing actually directly contradict Carl Jung and Briggs Myers. So anyway, the point isn't to rely blindly on Carl Jung, even though he was awesome, or rely blindly on these people. The point is to see for yourself what works. Don't just swallow things hook, line, and sinker. And not just about personality typing, about anything. Learn to question. I know that's a very generic thing to say, but the reason I'm saying this is that the entire point of Albop is to decondition all of us. Every post, the Type Hero series, these videos, some of the things we're going to be releasing hopefully soon, all of it is to show you what you can do, to show you that you can figure these things out, and in any case, in many, many subtle ways, to decondition this attitude that shuts aside the independence of our own minds. And it is everywhere. We see this attitude everywhere. We want to listen to the they, what the big they say, instead of saying, well, wait a minute. And you know what? If you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense to me, perhaps the majority of the time, it will make sense to you later, and you'll find out that the big name person was in fact right. But not always. And some people are wrong a lot. And so anyway, thank you for letting me share it with you, that this thing about this conditioned reflex that our culture has given us not to question what we're given. I wasn't planning on sharing this story because I'm not going to back it up. But forget it. I just mentioned I'm going to share a story, and I'm not. I'll tell that story some other time. Anyway, thank you very much for hearing this, and we'll talk more about the scientific method and specifically how it applies to personality typing and some of the conflicts about personality typing in, I think, the next episode. Thank you very much. Talk to you later.